Good morning. So normally when I start out, I like to tell some kind of a joke or some kind of an anecdote, and I'm not going to lie to you, that's more for me than you because it gets me kind of comfortable, makes me feel like I'm in my element and, calms me down. I get to be sarcastic, say something funny, and I was sitting there. I normally don't figure out what I'm going to say until I sit down that Sunday morning. I was sitting there, and I've got nothing. I was blank, and made me think, it doesn't matter how long I've preached, I will never remember to figure out what the scripture reading will be until I'm asked, hey, what's the scripture this morning? And in the past, I've reverted to the verse in Kings where somebody makes fun of Elijah for being bald and bears maul them. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. So I thought I should have told Caleb to read that verse, but it's probably better that he read one that was somewhat associated with what we're talking about this morning. But that is my somewhat funny anecdote that maybe calmed me down a little bit and helped me to do this a little bit better. But as you can see this morning, we are going to be talking about buying in. And first, I'm going to go on to a topic that some of you are not going to like very much, probably 50% of you. But in 2012, Ole Miss hired Hugh Freeze. Let's forget how that ended and just think about how it started. Okay. I was not expecting too much. I don't think anybody was because the previous year we went 2-10. I say we like I have any kind of connection with the program whatsoever. But, the players bought into what he was doing. They believed in what he was doing, and because of that, the first year they went to a bowl game. They won a bowl game, and you saw the success that they had. Mostly the same players. You look at the rosters the 2 years, and mostly it was the same exact team. So what was the difference? The difference was that the entire team bought into what he was trying to do. The entire team decided, hey, I believe in what this guy is trying to do. I believe in the guys that are around me. I believe that we can win. They bought into it. And it's a story that you see in sports over and over again when people band together and buy into what the team is trying to do, and they're driven toward one purpose. Even if it's just for one game, even if it's for a whole season, whatever, you hear the story over and over again. In the business world, they talk about it a lot, getting your team on one page, and they call it getting the buy-in. And I think that's something very important for us as Christians to have the buy-in. So my question for you is, have you bought in here? For members of our congregation here at Ripley, we're thankful to have you. And have you bought into this church, though? Have you fully bought in to the Ripley Church of Christ? And if you are not a member, we'd love to have you here as members, but have you bought into the church universal? Have you bought into God's church, and have you bought into a congregation where you live if you do not live here? So have you bought into the church? So the question I'd like to ask today is, what happens when you buy in? What does it look like to buy in? Kind of two separate issues, and I think you'll see why in a moment, but what happens and what does it look like? So you might ask yourself, have I bought in already? Have I bought in enough? Have I done enough to have bought into this church? And the answer is going to be no. Period. It's no. Not because you're not worth anything as a Christian, not because we don't appreciate what you do, but because we are not perfect as a congregation. We never will be. You will never be perfect as an individual, but it is something that we strive for every day to be better and better and better. So have you bought in enough? Absolutely not. And especially when you look at Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Jesus loved the church so much that he died for it. So you ask yourself, have you done enough? And here's the thing. He did not buy into the church so you could have a easy go of things. He did not buy into the church so you could be lazy. You see Matthew 16:24, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And remember who he is saying this to and when he is saying it. He is talking to his apostles before his crucifixion. So it's not like when he's saying this to them, he's saying, you know how I died, you take my death and the cross, and they're correlated. They had no idea how Jesus was going to die. So what he was saying then is, this execution, which is terrible, which is one of the worst deaths that you can imagine, especially in this world right now, one of the worst deaths possible. That is what I am telling you. That is how dedicated I want you to be, that even though that might be in your future, I want you to buy in so much that you're okay with that. He tells them to take up their cross and go daily. Do you do that? Have you bought in that much? So I want to look at the way that how it looks and what changes, and I want to look at three things. I want to look at the outside, I want to look at the inside, and then I want to look congregationally, which the app that I use to make these says is not a word. I Googled it. It said it was a word. I don't know. You can decide for yourself whether congregationally is good grammar or not. But we're going to look at these three things: inside, outside, and congregationally. The first one we're going to look at is on the outside, and it comes down to two different things. This is why I'd separate what it looks like and what happens. So what does it look like to buy in? Excuse me, that sounded really weird. First off, you see the contribution. And in this scenario, I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about the amount that you contribute, even though that is important. Where man's money lies, there lies his heart. But what I'm talking about here, we have a goal. Matthew 28, the Great Commission, tells us to go into all the world. We have a goal set forth. We have a goal to get to heaven and to bring as many people as possible. It's a very simple goal. So here's what I'm going to tell you this morning. Either you are helping that goal or you are hurting that goal. There's really only two options there. Either you are doing something to further God's kingdom, to improve the name of this congregation, to improve this church, or you are doing something to hurt it. So I ask the kids this a lot because this is something that kids get told a lot. You shouldn't care what anybody thinks of you. But really, should you care what people think of you? Absolutely you should, because if people look down on you as a moral individual, if they see you and you are not anything close to a Christian in their eyes, why in the world would they listen to you about the Bible? Does it matter how people see you in terms of being a Christian? Absolutely. Does it matter how people see you about your personality or the things that you like? No, who cares about that? But when it comes to whether or not somebody is going to listen to you when you are trying to preach the word to them, it absolutely matters. So should we care what people think about this congregation here at Ripley? Absolutely. Because when you go out and you try to talk to somebody about the Bible and say, okay, where do you go to church? Oh, Ripley Church of Christ. What's their response going to be? It's going to be like, oh, goodness, no, I don't want to listen to what you say. That you go to that church? No, that's terrible. Or are they going to be like, hey, I've heard really good things about that church. Let's continue to talk. So does it matter what people think about the church here? Absolutely it does. So if you are an individual who comes here and leaves and that's all you do, how do you think people look at the church? Because you are a representative of this church. If people see you here and they see that you're not doing anything to further God's kingdom, what do you think they're going to think about this church? So you are either helping to expand God's kingdom or you are hurting the people who are trying. And here's the thing, I want to be very, very specific about this. If you are one of the people who you look at yourself and you say, I'm probably hurting because I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing anything, I'm not asking you to leave. We don't want you to leave. We want you here. We want you to do better. And if you're one of the people who say, you know what, I'm helping, I want you to do better too. Because we can all do better. But there is a contribution that takes place when you buy in. We have a goal and we contribute to accomplishing that goal. And that is what buying in looks like. And here you look at Romans 12 when Paul is talking about how the body has many members and how the members work together to do things. And we won't take time to read all of that because you'll get very bored listening to me read. But you can see starting in verse 6, after the colon there, if
prophecy, if your gift is prophecy, let us prophesy. If it's ministry, use that to ministry. And basically what he is saying here, when he is talking about it, he's talking about the spiritual gifts that people have. But you apply that to us today when we do not have the same kind of spiritual gifts. Whatever you're able to do, do it. However you're able to help the church, help the church. Whatever your ability may be, everyone has something that they can do to help God's church. So this is something that I think kind of hurts the church today. You look at the setup of the first century church and you look at the setup of the church today, and it's going to have to be a little bit different because society is so much astronomically different. And I'm not talking about the things that we read in Scripture. I'm just talking about the social aspects of things. And for instance, we don't know for sure, but I do very much doubt that they had a paid youth minister in the church in the first century. Now, let's not get too crazy with that information. I like my job. But still, I think so much of the time in today's church, people see, well, we pay a youth minister, we pay a preacher, we have elders, we have deacons. They need to take care of all this. Why should I do anything? They're there. Absolutely not. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you do. You have a responsibility to this church. You are either helping this church or you are hurting this church. And, you may be looking at me thinking, well, that's easy for you to say. You're one of the guys getting paid to work here. And you're absolutely right. But my existence doesn't change yours. The facts about my life doesn't change the facts about yours. Megan working nights, it's always funny if I have a rough night or something, I go, man, I'm tired. You're tired? Really? Do you know what I do? And it's like, yes, I understand. You're more tired than I am, but that doesn't mean that I'm not tired. And it's the same kind of situation here. Yeah, you're right. I do get paid to do this. Me and Josh do get to come in here and work on our lessons, and this is our job. But that doesn't mean that you are free from responsibility. And there's going to come a day where this is not my job. And at that time, I will have the same responsibility that I have now to minister to people who are not in the church and to do my best to bring them into the church, because that is what it looks like to buy in. So it comes down to contribution and it comes down to priorities. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Or here it says mammon. So this is something you've heard over and over again. This is not something that I think is groundbreaking here. What is your priorities? What is on top? What is number one? Because you can't serve two masters. Going back to Romans 6:20, it says, "For when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regards to righteousness." You skip a verse there. It's supposed to be 6:22. My apologies. But now, having been set free from sin and having become a slave of God, you have your fruit to holiness, and the end everlasting life. So basically what it's saying there when you look at it is there is no such thing as freedom. Freedom does not exist for us. Either we are slaves of sin or we are slaves to God. There's only two options. You cannot serve both. You cannot be, I a little bit serve God, but also a little bit serve sin. It is one or the other, and it is all out either way. In Revelations we see where John talks about lukewarm. Lukewarm is not what God wants us either direction. He wants us all out in one or the other, and that's what it's saying here. So what are your priorities? And I want to make it clear that a change in priorities is not an emotional change. It can be seen that way, but the point that I'm making this morning, it is not an emotional change. It is a decision to make sacrifices. It is the decision to put God above other things and to show that. And it's kind of like I think in our society today we have such a tendency to make love no more than an emotion, an emotion that you feel for people. And if you have been married more than 5 minutes, you know that there are times when it is very hard to have that emotion toward the other person when they're screaming at you because you didn't do the dishes. But it's not just an emotion. It is a decision that you make that I'm going to love this person. I'm going to be with this person. I'm going to do everything I can to make our lives better together. Because That's what I decided. And it is the same thing here. When I talk about priorities, it's making a decision to make sacrifices. Sacrifices of your time so that you can be here. I understand that there are things that keep people from coming to church. Like I mentioned earlier, my wife has a job where she works nights and kind of helps whether people live or die. So it's kind of an important job that she be there. The hospital doesn't close. So there are reasons to miss, but what are they? How seriously are you taking it to be here? Effort. You sacrifice effort so that you can help with God's work. It's one thing to show up and sacrifice your time, but then you say, I need to do more. If Sunday morning and Wednesday nights are the only time that you are in this building, I don't think you're contributing enough. Because I look out and I can point at specific people who even this weekend, even throughout the past couple of weeks, have been here working tirelessly to make things in the church work the best that they can. And it's not just on Sunday morning and Wednesday night. It's not just after church they're doing things. They sacrifice their effort, they sacrifice their time to come here and work toward the goal that we have. And it's sacrificing sinful desires as to not give the church a bad name. You're helping or you're hurting. You're helping by bringing people into the church, or you're hurting by giving the people of this congregation a bad name. And you're hurting by making it harder for the people who are actually trying to help. That is very harsh. I understand that. That's why I say I don't want you to leave. I want you to do better. I want you here. I love you simply because you're in this building. Because you made the decision to sacrifice your time this morning when you could be sleeping. And trust me, I could still be sleeping. But you made that sacrifice to be here. And I love you for that, but we're asking you for more. We're asking you to buy into this congregation. But that's what it looks like to buy in on the outside. So what does it change? What changes? This goes into the category of what changes when you buy in. What changes on the inside? Your priorities, they turn into wants. They turn into desires. So priorities turn to desires. And what I mean by that is the things that you make yourself do. And I always go back to sports. So here you see somebody running with a weighted sled behind them. You know, the things that you make yourself do, you kind of force yourself to do because, you know, that's how you get better and all this stuff. You start to cherish those things. They become things you cherish because they know that's what brings you closer to your goal. And you have sprinters here, their goal to run fast as they can, to run faster than everybody else. They start to cherish the work because they know it brings them closer to what they want to do. So we prioritize things like Bible study. We prioritize things like prayer, like spending time with God, spending time with the people that we know will bring us closer to God. And yeah, sometimes let's be honest about it. It starts as chores. It starts as something that you have to do. But as you grow and as you mature as a Christian, and I think that's something, talking about how society has changed since the first century, I think that's something that we kind of numb ourselves to maturing as a Christian. We get to a point and then we stay there. We don't continue to mature ourselves, but the oldest person in here should be still maturing in their Christianity. The youngest person here should be maturing in their Christianity. Maybe not at the same pace, maybe because they don't have as much to go, but we still need to be maturing in our Christianity. And as you mature, you get to a point where you realize if your goal is to be closer to God, this time that you spend in Bible study, this time that you spend in prayer, you start to cherish it because you know it brings you closer to your goal, which is being close to God. So the priorities that you have turn into desires, and your goals change. Amos 3:3 says, "Can two walk together except they be agreed?" In other words, can two people go in the same direction unless they agree what direction they're going? You know, if two people decide, all right, we're gonna do this together, and then they go in opposite directions, they're not going to do it together. So the idea is your direction becomes the direction of the people around you in this building right now, the direction that the church is going. And here's the beautiful thing. We don't have to argue over it. We don't have to debate over it. We don't have to decide what direction we're going, because the direction has been set for us, and the direction is going toward heaven. So we all have the same goal. And as you buy into the church, as the things on your inside, the heart changes, the more that goal that the church has to bring as many people here and to get to heaven ourselves, that becomes your goal. That becomes something that you want. We all go in the same direction. And that's why I bring up the analogy of sports teams. When they all buy into the same thing, they all want the exact same thing, that's when they have success. When they're all walking in the same direction, when they're going together, that is when they have success. So apply the same to us. When we're all working toward the same thing, when we all want the same thing, and that's not to have more prestige in the church, and that's not that my priorities, get done. Not that this thing that I've been wanting to do gets done. It's how can we get more people here? That's what I want to work toward. How can we get more people to heaven? How can I have a better relationship with God and the people around me? That is when we have success in the church, when we all have the same goal. And that goal has already been set for us. So when you buy in, your goals change. And also, you develop a sense of responsibility. So you start to take things a little more personally. Things start to cut you a little deeper. And here's the thing, I don't mean gossip. I'm not saying that you start feeling worse when people talk bad about you. That's not what I'm talking about. But you start to take things personally, like, why aren't more people here on Sunday night? Is it your fault? No, it's not your fault. Absolutely not. What could you have possibly done for it to be your fault? But you'll ask yourself the question, how can I help this situation? How can I help do things better? And with this idea of responsibility, I think about one of my best friends in the world. He goes to a church. His whole family it started out as just them, and over the past few years, it's really boomed and blown up. And I have a lot of respect for this congregation. And there's one person in it that he just cannot stand. And he's talked to me about it. He struggles with it because, how you're supposed to feel about people. You're supposed to love people, and it's really hard because this person comes to church all the time but doesn't live how they're supposed to live. And everybody around town knows it. And everybody around town knows where she goes to church. And it drives him absolutely up a wall. Because he knows how much that hurts the congregation. He knows how much that people see this other individual is not living the way that they're supposed to, and how people view the congregation because of that. It drives him nuts. And you might be asking, is it right to have that much love and that much put toward a single congregation? The congregation is part of the universal church. This congregation is a part of God's church, so absolutely. It's kind of the idea of you handle what's in front of you. You can't change things that you can't change, so you handle what's in front of you, and what's in front of you right now is helping this congregation. And that's why we are set up this way. So you have what happens to you on the outside. You have what happens to you on the inside. What happens to us as a whole, as a congregation? This first one is probably a word that you don't hear positively in sermons very much, especially from me. I've shared my opinion. I don't have factual evidence to back this up, but my opinion that pride is the root of every sin. Ego is the root of every sin. So why would I say that this is a good thing? You start to understand that God can use you to make a difference in His kingdom. And when you realize that, and that's the thing, it's not you making a difference in God's kingdom. It's God is using you to make a difference in His kingdom. And when you understand that, there's very few feelings in the world that equal that. There are very few feelings in the world where you say, God just used me to make a difference in His kingdom. And you will want to bring people to church with you. You will want people to come into this building and see what you have in your life. When you have something good in your life, you want to share it. Megan showed me a picture of it's like an otter holding a baby otter and says, I made this. And she's like, this is how I'm going to be. And she has been. Everybody, look at our baby. Look at how cute this is.
is something wonderful in our life, and we want to share it with people because it is so wonderful, and that's what the church becomes. It becomes something that you want to bring people to. You want to share with other people because how wonderful of a thing it is in your life. Romans 1:16 says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of truth. And it's not just that Paul was not ashamed of it, he was proud of it. It was something that he put his life stock into and said, this is something that I love. This is something that I want to share with people. And I kind of look to it as, again, going back to football, when Ole Miss beat Alabama the first time several years back. Some Alabama fans in here are getting mad right now. But when it happened, I was at Freed. I wore an Ole Miss shirt every day that week, purposefully. It wasn't by accident. It's like, oh, you know, I wore it every day, and I walked around with my chest out like, yeah, this is the top we will ever be, but we did it. I was proud. I wanted to show that off. When you buy into the church, when we all buy into the same direction and things start going the way that they're supposed to go, that's how you feel about this. That's how you feel about this congregation. And I've had kind of arguments with myself about how, well, let me get to this first. Why is a dryer on the screen? It's kind of a weird thing. This is to remind me to talk about this. When you put your time, I've talked about this a lot, when you put your time, effort, and energy into things, you start to care about them a lot more. I have never cared about our dryer. We have a magical house, if you didn't know that. I put clothes in the dirty clothes, and they're just magically in my drawer later on. I don't know how it happens, but something just magically happens. But a few weeks ago, Megan said, hey, our dryer's not heating up. So I don't have enough money to hire somebody to do it. So I took our dryer apart, figured out what was wrong with it, and then put it back together. And I have never been so proud of myself for doing something like that in my entire life. But it's broken again now. I don't know how. But but I care about our dryer now. I'm proud of our dryer because I took it apart and put it back together. And it's this same idea of, hey, I participated in making that better. I'm proud of this. This is something that means something to me. And you develop a sense of accountability. When someone is giving your church a bad name, you want to do something about it. And it's the same idea of responsibility. You know, it cuts you when you hear somebody say something negative about your church. It cuts you when you say where you go to church and people say, oh, really? I've heard some bad things about that church. It hurts. James 5:19-20 says that if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he turned back a sinner from the error of his ways and will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. And then we see Matthew 18:15. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. So it's a biblical idea to go to people when they have sinned, when they have wronged you. And the question becomes, do these really apply? Because we're talking about giving the church a bad name. But in Matthew 18, it says sins against you. So does that give you a reason to go to a person because you feel that they are giving the church a bad name? And I would say your identity should be wrapped up in being a Christian. Your identity should be defined by your relationship with God. And part of that is this church. I would say yes. And of course, I tell the kids all the time, you can do the right thing in the wrong way. You can approach somebody about something they've done and completely mess that up, make the situation worse. It's very possible. But you go about it the right way, and you feel like you have a great deal more accountability to the people around you, because the people around you are this church. And I fight back and forth sometimes about, how much pride should I try to get the kids to have in the youth group. We have this logo, and I wanted it to be something that they could have and wear and show and say, hey, I'm a member of the Ripley youth group. And I kind of questioned that, but then I thought about it. The youth group is part of this congregation. This congregation is part of the universal church. Every group that we have here, be proud that you're a part of that group, because it's a part of this congregation, which is a part of the church universal, which God loves so much that he gave his son to die for it. You should be passionate about this place.
And I say this place, and there's a lot of talk about, it's just a building. And it is just a building. This is no more than a building. But what do you associate with this building? When you walk in here, even when people aren't here, I associate this with how much I love coming here when the building is full. So no, there's nothing special about this building, but what happens here is very special. It's very important. And when we walk together, things get done. When we walk together, we accomplish things. When we walk together, souls get saved. When we walk together, people's views of this congregation change. And when we walk together, you change. So I had this as the background, and I hoped y'all would let me get through the sermon before you fired me for having a poker table in the background of this. But Josh talked last week about gambling, and I was already thinking about this, and it kind of made me put these things together. Something strange about me, I told Megan this, she never knew this, and she thought it was the weirdest thing. When I was 12, I watched a lot of World Poker Tour. They have it on ESPN 35 because that's how far down the ESPN list you got to get until you see poker. I watched a lot of it, and you might ask why? Because my brother controlled the TV. But 11, 12-year-old, I watched a lot of poker, which is a really weird thing. But one of the things that was always interesting was when somebody decided to go all in, they pushed their chips to the table, their whole demeanor changed. Because, the whole time they're just sitting there trying not to show emotion, trying not to do anything. They would stand up, they'd walk away from the table, they'd turn their hat around, man, they were just pacing, they'd bend over the table to see what the next card is. They're just all kind of worried because everything that they had just worked for, the hours that they had just spent playing poker, every bit of money that they had invested in this game was now at risk. It was now in the middle of the table. They could lose it all. That's how bought into the game they were. That's how excited about the game they were because they had put that much effort into it. They were buying into everything. That hand was so good to them, they were putting everything that they had on the table. How important is the church to you? How important is the success or failure of the things that go on in this building? How important is the success and failure of the brothers and sisters that you have sitting beside you? How important is the success of your own spiritual life? How important is that to you? So I ask you the same thing I ask pretty much every time I speak. Ask yourself these questions. I can stand here and ask them all day long, and it will mean absolutely nothing to you unless you look at yourself and ask yourself, have I bought into this church? Have I bought into this congregation? Have I bought into the church universally? And if you have not, why not? If you have not, we offer this opportunity for everyone. If you feel like you have not bought in, if you feel like you lack something in terms of what you need to give to the church, if you have yet to give your entire life to the church, we talk about buying in. The best way to buy in is to give your everlasting soul to God in baptism. If you need anything, if you need the prayers of the church, or if you need to have your sins washed away, we will rejoice with you. We will wrap our arms around you and pray for you. I ask that you come now as we stand and sing.